Good morning, everyone. This is Saturday, March 10th, 2018. We welcome you to our Bible study. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we are actually here this morning because on Wednesday we were not. Too much snow. Okay, and today our moderator is Luann from New York.
Good morning, everyone. Our quote for today is from Miscellaneous Writings by Mary Baker Eddy, page 199. The miracles recorded in the Scriptures illustrate the life of Jesus as nothing else can, but they cost him the hatred of the rabbis. The rulers sought the life of Jesus. They would extinguish whatever denied and defied their superstitions. We learned somewhat of the qualities of the divine mind through the human Jesus. The power of his transcendent goodness is manifest in the control it gave him over the qualities opposed to spirit, which mortals name matter.
That is a wonderful.
Very good. Very good.
I think it's wonderful, Mrs. Eddy. Denied and defied their superstition, and so it always is and always will be. Do not be impressed with what any big organization tries to impress you with, whether it's the materia medica, religion, educational system. It's superstition if it doesn't line up with the Bible. Well, just before we go on, his transcendent goodness is manifest in the control it gave him over the qualities opposed to spirit, which mortals name matter. So that's something we must all be developing, our transcendent goodness, because that's the only way we can control the opposition by our own purity, our own goodness. Okay,
You can't fight fire with fire.
No, you cannot. Otherwise, you'll just be in a big argument. And if you are in that divine state of mind, you will have the appropriate answers to give the opposition. Won't be fighting with it. Okay, Luann, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to kind of catch everybody up to this chapter 9 by going through a little bit of chapter 8 and the reason for the topic, sin lieth at the door, which is from Genesis 4:7. I wrote down, every time I do the research for our Bible study, it drives home the importance of knowing the Scripture. I found that in order to gain a better understanding of the, quote, miracle that took place in John 9, I had to see the bigger picture, which includes John 8, 9, and 10. In these chapters, Jesus puts an end to old theological systems of the Pharisees and shatters their false securities and proves he is indeed the Messiah spoken of in Scripture. He extends his hand with a great warning, knowing what was in the hearts of those who sought to kill him. That's from John 8:40. In chapter 8, Jesus is laying it all out there for the Pharisees, explaining to them that they have no right to judge any man because they are sinners themselves. Ye are of your father the devil, from John 8:44. He never backs off. He tells them that if they do not turn from their sins and repent and honor God by honoring him, they will die in their sins. And this is similar to the conversation God is having with Cain in Genesis 4, when he's so angry that he wants to kill Abel. And this is from Matthew Henry. God is here reasoning with Cain to convince him of the sin and folly of his anger and discontent, and to bring him into good temper again, that further mischief might be prevented. It is an instance of God's patience and condescending goodness that he would deal thus tenderly with so bad a man in so bad an affair. He is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Thus the father of the prodigal argued the case with the elder son, and God with those Israelites who said, the way of the Lord is not equal, and that is from our lesson of Ezekiel 18. God is telling Cain that if he keeps to his wrath, that sin lieth at the door. That is, if now thou wilt not do well, if thou persist in this wrath, and instead of humbling thyself before God, harden thyself against him, sin lieth at the door. That is, further sin. Now thy anger is in thy heart, murder is at the door. Those who do not sacrifice well, but are careless and remiss in their devotion to God, expose themselves to the worst temptations, and perhaps the most scandalous sin lies at the door. And that's all from Matthew Henry. And he says that this should have been enough to turn them. Instead, it fueled their anger.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health, page 315, the opposite and false views of the people hid from their sense Christ's sonship with God. They could not discern his spiritual existence. Their carnal minds were at enmity with it. Their thoughts were filled with mortal error instead of with God's spiritual idea as presented by Christ Jesus. The likeness of God we lose sight of through sin, which beclouds the spiritual sense of truth, and we realize this likeness only when we subdue sin and prove man's heritage, the liberty of the sons of God. That should bring us up to chapter 9.
Well, thank you very much.
That's good.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Shows how it works. You don't control your anger, your self-righteousness, your pride, and the next thing, worse. Get worse. Doesn't get better.
Okay, so the first question is, what fueled the disciples' belief that the man's blindness was due to sin?
I have something I'd like to share. We forget, or I forget, that the disciples, although searching for the Messiah and finding Christ, were taught the Jewish religion. And then, this is from NIV, who sinned? The rabbis had developed the principle that there's another quote here, there is no death without sin, and there is no suffering without iniquity, end quote. And then the rest of NIV. They were even capable of thinking that a child could sin in the womb, or that its soul might have sinned in a pre-existent state. They also held that the terrible punishments came on certain people because of the sins of their parents. Jesus contradicted these beliefs, end quote.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this was a common belief. It was a deeply rooted common belief. It was considered law at the time, wasn't it?
It's interesting that even way back then, this was still old theology. It was still an old belief.
Yeah, there was a superstition that anybody suffered if there was sin somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask a question then. Jesus said occasionally to someone whom he had helped, go and sin no more. But I guess that was to the woman that came in to bathe his feet. I guess that was the point of that, and people knew that she had sinned.
Was the woman taken in adultery.
Yes.
He was in the presence of a lot of people that wanted to prove their position by accusing her. We caught her in the very act. Jesus stood silent for a while, wrote in the dust. They kept on asking him. Then he took some more time to look into their eyes. Finally says, well, of all you guys that are accusing, for all of you who have never sinned, you can throw the first stone. They were convicted of their own conscience, just simply walked away.
Jesus knew what needed to be addressed. He did. He was not fooled, and it was their thought that needed addressing.
Also, regarding the disciples' belief about the man sinning, Matthew Henry says that they should have known better as they knew the scriptures, and that all things come alike to all. And as Job
suffered so much, it wasn't that he was such a great sinner that he suffered.
Yes. Well, and again, this is the deep beliefs of old theology, that you're born a sinner, you're born into matter, you're going to die out of it. And I know, someone not that long ago who's a lifelong scientist that class taught and all that, was thinking of having a baby, but she was 40 or something, and she was worried it would be born mongoloid. I mean, I bring that up because where is God in any of this? This is all, as it started out, these are superstitious beliefs. And if we hold to them, we will be in belief, governed by them, and it can happen to anybody. I mean, I think Pilar wrote well on the forum, how she'd struggled about beliefs of heredity and other things. She's been in science a while now. They're very entrenched, and they must be seen for what they are and overturned. And then we go to another extreme that says that from believing that you're a terrible sinner to saying, well, there's no sin, therefore I can do anything I want. Those are the two extremes that exist in science, the false sense of science. Okay, go ahead, whoever.
Oh, it's very pernicious, the persistent, that belief of heredity, and then it's also compounded by the medical profession because it's so entrenched. Like you said, they do, as soon as you go into any medical office, if you need to go to, they will ask you about your background and have your mother had this, or have your father had this, anybody in your family had this and that and whatever. And it's really already putting those thoughts in your mind that, well, if my mom or my dad died of a heart attack, most likely I'm going to have, this problem. And it's almost like they're gearing you into that kind of belief. It's very, very persistent and very, very wicked.
And what should you answer if someone asks you those questions?
Oh,
Can you tell us that your human history? No.
It just reinforces it.
My father and my mother are God. My ancestry is the beautiful, the good, and the pure. I stand with that. They ask me that, I tell them nothing, or I say everyone passed on in their sleep, or whatever. But I don't give any information like that. That's nobody's business. It's superstition, and it's not true. Do not believe it. Do not repeat it. Do not think about it.
I think that after a while in science, I think then it's bordering on being sinful, being obstinate. You don't want to hear, you're not listening, obeying what God is saying because we are taught what is the truth. So after a while, I mean, initially, yes, it's so aggressive and all that, but I think at a point it also requires how much you are willing to bend and not, so adhere to the old beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of work to come out of these beliefs. But why does she call them superstition? Why do we refer to these, the man's blindness was due to sin? Why do we call that a superstition?
It's not based in truth.
Well, it's right. It's based on a belief that the blindness was real, true. Mm-hmm. That God's image and likeness could be blind.
It's really a self-apart from God.
Yeah, it's based on the belief that you do inherit material conditions. It's based on the belief these things are real when they're not. And that's why it's called superstition.
And many of the commentaries, they go along with, well, God controls everything, so God did make this person blind at birth. Well, what does science say?
It's wrong. It's not true at all.
It's not true.
And that takes us to question number 2.
Well, before, in Watch's Prayers and Arguments, page 176, definition. Animal magnetism is starting a belief and getting others to fear it until evil is done to those that hold the belief, and a law is made, and the error goes on gaining ground until the serpent becomes a dragon. You remember that definition, and that absolutely applies to the belief, the human laws of heredity. God never said it. That is not in God's law. But if you believe it, it's become a dragon now because so many people believe it. That's why we have to be so instant in truth and always knowing the truth about ourselves. So if anyone asks you questions like that, even if anyone asks you how old they are, Reg Carey used to say, I'm as old as God. So.
And Mrs. Eddy says, be so instant in truth that error is
Always too late.
right. Cut it off at the knees.
These aggressive suggestions we must be equally aggressive with and go over the whole ground, Mrs. Eddy says. You rake the whole ground up. You till the soil. You don't let any of them take lodgment. And you certainly don't think about how your Aunt Tilly passed on, and you're probably going to as well the same way. I mean, good grief.
I think that's why Mrs. Eddy's caution that the first commandment is our weapon is so important. I find it very helpful. Always thinking about that. Everything else that comes, no.
Yes. You're believing in a power apart from God. You're believing in another God when you believe in heredity. So, that's God says no, and He's a jealous God. That means, don't go there. And you'll find you can prove it to be not true. And Mrs. Evans used to tell this story about someone who had a lovely grandmother, very lovely, and the person thought, oh, I'm so much like my grandmother. She was so beautiful. She had such a lovely temperament. And then she found out what?
Yeah, there was another quality that was not so favorable, and that they took on that same unfavorable quality. So you try to pick out the good, but if it's human, you got it all.
Yes. Her grandmother had arthritic hands. And so guess what? She might have been beautiful and lovely, but she also had arthritic hands. So please, don't go there. Even if you think your background is good. No, your ancestry is the beautiful, the good, and the pure. You come from God. What I read Wednesday night, your background, Una Willard. Why not take that? Why not live with that? Don't go the other. Don't feel any pride about it or any shame about your background. It's just a big
superstition.
Thank you.
So, we talked sometime before about correct identification. This is it. Came from God. We're here for Him. We're here to serve Him. We're His children. We're His expression. It's, that's the original and pure identity of man, and it is true today and always.
And it's in 1 Timothy in the lesson. Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questions, rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. So here, 1 Timothy, he puts genealogy in the same category as fables.
And all these people checking out their genealogy. Now you send in your DNA and they'll tell you all kinds of things. Don't go there. And Mrs. Eddy did it first, and she talked about some of her ancestry, but then she said she had to learn not to do it. And she didn't even admit she was born at Bo. She said she was born in mind.
The other thing that struck me so clearly with this question was how quick the human mind is to pin sin on somebody else. It's like an automatic thing. It pins sin on somebody. Jesus addressed this thing when he talked about the mote and the beam. I'm not saying this, that sin needs to be ignored, but the human mind is going to point the finger at somebody else and say how sinful they are. Will do nothing to look within.
And it's very easy, and I know as Christian Scientists too, the minute you hear if someone has a problem, you start thinking, well, what did they do wrong? You should be very, very careful about that. What has Mrs. Eddy said? She says, if you're sick, does that mean you were sinful?
No, and it didn't mean that you weren't sinful if you were healthy.
Thank you. That's the quote. But she says, and who are we to judge? Now, for our own part, when we're working out of problems, sometimes to look within and to change ways and patterns that have been disobedient to God, that is absolutely correct and right. But absolutely, you are a child of God, of pure and sinless heart, as the hymn goes.
So our job is to learn to act that way.
Right, and exactly. So we line up with the whole picture. And what was the topic of your forum?
Oh, what was it? Not condemnation, but compassion.
Yes, I love that. Not condemnation, but compassion. And let's see, who was it? I think this was Spurgeon, this quote, where he says, "It is ours not to speculate, but to perform acts of mercy and love according to the tenor of the gospel. Let us then be less inquisitive and more practical, less for cracking doctrinal nuts, and more for bringing forth the bread of life to a starving multitude." I mean, honestly, when you think of it, here's this guy, a beggar, born blind, and what did the disciples say?
He's a sinner.
Yeah, what did he do? Who sinned? Was there any compassion in that question?
No.
Certainly not.
They were just going by the belief.
So please, I take it as a rebuke to myself. Make sure we're not in that judging mode.
Well, Mrs. Eddy says when she stopped to criticize, condemn, or judge, she made progress. So that's for us.
Thank you. That's a wonderful statement.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't rebuke error. That doesn't mean that you actually get more sensitive to beliefs and errors. But remember, it's not the person. Never is. That gives you the authority of Christ to rebuke it.
I really like just how Jesus ended it, saying, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Thinking that's just a good way to look at any situation.
Yes, that's so right, and that goes to the next question.
Right. Question number 2.
What was Jesus' response to their inquiry? I wrote.
Jeremy read part of it, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, Jesus answered, neither has this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him.
We demonstrate God's power.
Yes.
That was his way of saying there is no cause for an error. There is no cause for something that is not true.
Thank you. You cannot give that reason why 2 + 2 = 5, can you? Is there a reason for that?
It's wrong, that's all.
Wrong.
Still trying to think of one.
It's
Come up with it yet.
It's just a misconception about the truth.
And explain how it happened.
Right.
It doesn't happen.
Exactly.
It's not true.
How can you explain how it happens? And yet people spend years and years explaining how an era happens. Write volumes of books on it. My goodness, what a waste of time.
And Larry says, but the works of God may be made manifest. What is he saying there?
I like the word. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, what are the works of God?
Well, goodness and purity and all the
Perfect God, perfect man, perfect universe.
I like that he just looked at it as a tremendous opportunity, not anything else.
That's exactly right. And that is what if you've got a problem confronting you, that's how you think about it. It's a tremendous opportunity to get closer to God, to prove his goodness, to seek him more. You can ask yourself briefly if there's anything you could do better. But if you just dwell and think, oh my gosh, I'm just a sinner and that's why I have this problem, you'll never get out of it, will you?
No. It says make each challenge a step for you to go higher, closer to God.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And was God's perfection for this man ever missing?
No?
No. No, but what was needed here?
Melody? Go ahead.
Yeah, what was needed in this particular situation?
Love.
What is ever needed?
Humility.
Belief and faith.
To see the truth.
Correct
Thank
you.
Understanding.
Thank you. What was needed was for people to see more clearly the perfection that God is and has and always will. This is the point. This is the healing, isn't it? In our consciousness, in our conscience, to see clearly God's perfection, which is always there. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people thought that somehow the clay and the washing off of the clay had something to do with his being able to see. But that was merely an indication of the need for our consciousness to see more clearly.
It's a waking up process. It's waking up to the truth. It's waking up from that Adam dream. And don't ever believe for a minute that God created that picture, because he did not. That is not part of God's creation. Just as we know God is the only cause and creator, he didn't cause it and he didn't create it. Just a bad dream, the Adam dream.
I think the washing was coming into the correct view, seeing correctly.
Exactly. It was symbolic of seeing more clearly the truth.
And you know, this is in Watch's Prayers and Arguments on page 161, where Mrs. Eddy speaks about the way. Do any of you remember what she says about this? Because it applies here. She takes the quote, ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, to consume it on your lust. What does that mean? Why should you even ask for healing or want a healing?
Be closer to God.
Yes,
Because it dishonors God.
yes, that's the word she uses, honor, because it dishonors God. Or if we should have it removed because it dishonors the way that God has revealed, and this dishonors God. Then our prayer will be answered because we ask from an unselfish motive and with an honest purpose to honor and love the way of God's idea. So, in any time you're struggling with the healing, ask yourself, why do you want it in the first place? I was shocked when I first realized I needed to do this. What is your motive in the healing? You just want to feel better. Yeah, well, okay. Who doesn't? We all want to feel better. But why? Just so you can go on your selfish way the selfish way you've always lived?
To heal the thought instead of the body.
Right. More about just getting yourself comfortable in matter. There has to be this purpose to honor God. And if you find that in yourself, and this can apply to anything. Why do you want more money? What are you going to do with it? Why do you want a better marriage? What's that all about? Is it just for your own selfish purpose? Or is it to honor God and to get closer to Him and to serve Him more nearly, love Him more dearly, and see Him more clearly, day by day? That should be your motive, and that was somewhat what Jesus was talking about with this. That the whole reason for the healing was to see the glory of God. Don't forget this, especially when you're struggling and don't understand why you're not being healed. Why do you want to be healed? It sounds like an obvious question, but it really isn't. Not if you're really honest. So if we covered Jesus and...
So we go on to question number 3.
Sure.
How did the Pharisees respond to the healing of the blind man?
They were enraged. They were angry, and
He keeps it not Sabbath day.
They were threatened, weren't they? Their whole belief system was threatened.
How dare he deny and defy us?
Matthew Henry said they were stuck in their doctrine and pride and did not the works. And Jesus was doing the works.
They did everything they could to justify their self-righteousness.
It's unbelievable to look at it in broad daylight. It's an amazing healing. And all they nitpick because they did it on Sunday?
It sure exposed the superficiality,
Yeah,
the
hypocrisy.
superstition, and the hypocrisy.
Says that they reviled the man, they insulted him, and then they cast him out. They excommunicated him. Interesting. Interesting what the organization does when it feels threatened. They call you names, they insult you, and then they excommunicate you. Now that sounds strangely familiar to me.
And they referred, and they and the Romans referred to Jesus as a sorcerer. This was sorcery, whatever that means.
Can I just read?
Go ahead.
Can I read the definition of superstition in the 1828 dictionary? It's really interesting. It excessive exactness or rigor in religious opinions or practice, extreme and unnecessary scruples in the observance of religious rites not commanded, or points of minor importance, excess or extravagance in religion, the doing of things not required by God, or abstaining from things not forbidden, or the belief of what is absurd, or belief without evidence.
Wow. Thank you.
I think that's so interesting. Huh.
So they accused Jesus of what they were guilty of. Sounds vaguely familiar.
I was glad that the man who was healed was so articulate. He was really able to put it to him before they kicked him out. So.
Yeah, one of the commentators said that they have had since many followers in their crimes. A false religion, supported by the state, has by fire and sword silenced those who truth in the end annihilated the system of their opponents. Goes back to what Gary said, they were threatened. They knew this era was going to destroy them, so they did everything to destroy it. And it still is at play, believe me.
Oh, it's very much at work. We see it in a lot of places, don't we?
And in our own selves, I think when we first start to uncover the error, it kind of turns on you.
Yep. We see it throughout a lot of so-called religious organizations, political organizations, so-called scientific organizations.
Mrs. Eddy, sorry.
No. If they're a human-based organization, they're going to feel threatened by the truth. Unless it's based on God, it's going to feel threatened, and it should.
It very much should. Go ahead, Linda.
I looked up a lot of the Pharisees with Mrs. Eddy and saw how much it's really just a type of thought. But Mrs. Eddy talks about the Pharisees fighting Jesus on these issues and it being a battleground from the past as it is in the present. And she refers to the fight as, in quote, an effort to enthrone evil. I thought that was a very simple, direct way of putting it.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And she was able to see it because she experienced it herself, firsthand.
Big time. Anyone who takes up the Christ, does his work, follows his path sincerely, is attacked by the human mind, the carnal mind, because the carnal mind is what?
Enmity to God.
Enmity against God.
Yep, it just can't help itself. That's what it does. So, through the ages, it has done it, continues to do it, and will continue to do it.
And that's part of the persecution of carrying the cross.
It is?
Yes, exactly.
So we mustn't be surprised, and we learn, and we learn here how to defend yourself from it, because God protects His people. They're not in a good place when they do try to attack you. That's what we talked about. The unforgivable sin a week or so ago.
And that was really the great sacrifice of Jesus. It was more than, Mrs. Eddy even says, it was more than just his going up on the cross. It was every day being persecuted by the human mind.
And Spurgeon said that he who enjoys the favor of the Son of God will not tremble at the frown of the Sanhedrin. know, that's what the Pharisees call their ecclesiastical despotism. So when you're enjoying that favor of God, all of this other stuff, all the stones they throw at you, doesn't mean so much. It certainly shouldn't deter you from your work.
Now, Jesus addresses that in the Beatitudes, where he talks about men reviling you and persecuting you. And then he says, rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So we really don't have to worry about it. Not when we are doing God's will and doing everything we can to bring forth his truth. We're protected.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Well, and you have a clear conscience, and you have a closeness with God that nothing can break. That is the heaven. That is your reward in heaven.
And that's why it is so important every day to make sure you do have that clear conscience. We would talk about keeping your slate clean. At the end of the day, you make sure you've done nothing to break any of God's commandments, beatitudes, hurt any of his little ones. You keep that. Because the only way error can get to you is how?
There's something in you that it can attach itself to.
Yes. And
Correct.
It will seek that. It will seek that.
It will look for a hook.
If you open that door that it lieth behind.
That's right.
Boxes.
If you are a malpractitioner, the malpractitioner will find you. If you are hateful, hate will find you. Lustful, if you are dishonest, all those things, it will find you, and it will rip you to shreds. This is not a nice, comfy battle here. So every day you clear yourself, and if you have done anything wrong, you can go to Pond and Purpose, ask God's forgiveness, clear yourself of it, change your ways, and your conscience is clear again, and you can go forward. And that way, you feel you're like David running toward Goliath. You have nothing to fear. Go ahead, do whatever you want. They can't touch you. You're totally protected. You're in that 91st Psalm, the secret place of the Most High.
And none of these things move me, right?
Yes. But if you're not, and if you're sinning yourself, well then just better zip your lip and get yourself to God.
If none of them move you, that's a wonderful sign, because it shows that you don't have a hook for it to attach itself to. But if they move you, it's a sign that there's something inside you that needs to be rooted out. And that's a good thing if you understand that that's what it's for. See, a lot of people didn't understand the discomfort that they felt when they were in Jesus' presence. A lot of people didn't understand the discomfort they felt when they were in Mrs. Eddy's presence, or Mrs. Evans' presence, or in the presence of any very spiritually minded person. But the discomfort is just a sign that there's something inside you that is threatened by the Christ. And if you understand that, then you can see it for what it is, get rid of it, and grow higher.
It's interesting because sometimes when people come here, most people find a great sense of peace and love. But some people chemicalize and react to you. And it's usually there's an error within them that they don't want exposed. And it will bubble up. But that's okay. That's why the church is here for healing. always a good thing if you don't run. Many people choose to run. It's only the error that's causing them to run.
My question is, if you run, where are you going to go?
Very good question.
Good.
You will be pursued and
follow you.
it will. There's nowhere to go. Thank you.
And isn't that what Peter said, or Simon Peter said? Lord, where else would we go?
Jeremy?
Well, I know for me, when I came here, I certainly was at the point where I had nowhere else to go. And there were times where I would get the sense like, I don't know, like fight or flight kind of a thing, but I would just realize there's no going back, you know, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful that it came to that point, because I may not have stayed otherwise.
Thank you for that. Because, yes, some of you coming to Plainfield April, we've talked about you come in a prayerful state. Not like you're coming, so Carol was saying, a meeting for greeting, or coming to some Mecca. A lot of good work is going on here. We've compared it, Mrs. Evans used to say, that it's like people entering the highway at 100 miles per hour. So, but for the most part, and most of you have said that you come and you feel the peace and the love and the comfort that this church gives. It's usually only when you stay a while and you have to face some of your demons that it gets a little tougher. And thank God Jeremy faced his demons.
I think if you stay and don't run away, the demons will leave. So.
They will, because they're not the truth.
Well, they definitely can't stay. So.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a question whether you continue to attach yourselves to them or whether you see them for what they are. That's exactly right.
So let's see, where are we?
Okay, can we move on to question number 4? What is the significance of Jesus finding the man after he was expelled from the temple?
I think this kind of is on the subject that I was just sitting here thinking. When the trouble comes here at Plainfield, when it comes to me, it's okay with me because it deals within me. I have to deal within myself to eliminate it. But when it affects somebody around me, or it appears to, the illusion, that's where I run into trouble. And I think this is exactly where Jesus' great compassion comes in, because the ex-blind man's confession that Jesus was the Messiah got him into trouble, and Jesus went to him, I think, to to explain to him that in the end, even on the material surface, it looked like it was a big tribulation, that in the end it's the eternal life and a win-win situation.
I was thinking about how when Jesus put the mud on his eyes and had him go wash, that the guy, when he started to see, he didn't know who Jesus was. He couldn't point him out. So when he went to the Pharisees, he was just able to show them Jesus' works, not make a target of Jesus. And they couldn't take the works. And so afterwards, when he found him, then he was able to clue him in on the rest of it.
Thank you. That's a good point. He always referred to the work.
Yeah, and he never went anywhere without God directing him. And this blind man was a very clear thought. Very clear, he answered the Pharisees' questions quite well, and he deserved to be encouraged, to have explained to him, to some extent anyway, what it was that healed him, and to strengthen his faith.
And that word shalom means sent. And to Luann's point, I mean, the Pharisees were living up to the chapter that had preceded this chapter, right? They were just showing forth all their hypocrisy and disbelief and all the things Jesus had said of them. And Luann explained at the beginning of the Bible study. Sin was lying at the door. So it said after they throw you out, after they excommunicate you, then they treat you like a leper. So what would that mean?
Permanently unclean.
Yeah. Shunned.
Don't come near.
Come near them. Because they didn't want a blind man to be telling everybody about the great healing. So they were trying to shut him up, do everything. And they did do that to our church.
Tried.
Yeah, they tried, and we were shunned. People heard terrible stories about us.
And they made up lies about us.
Yeah, they made up lies. Some of them are still on the internet.
They're still there, yes, and they
Still
hold in the thought of people.
Yeah.
And the man said, "Why, herein is a marvelous thing that ye know not from whence he is, yet he opened mine eyes. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing." I mean, it was very clear to him.
It was.
Right, and it was such a rebuke to the Pharisees. They couldn't stand it. They had to make, they had to either make a huge change or live with their gross hypocrisy.
Yeah, they said he was born in sins, and how dare he teach them?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's
And
right.
yet they were the ones who invited him to ask,
Exactly.
explain what happened.
Repeatedly.
It wasn't his fault he was there.
Yeah, they were just incensed.
He didn't invite himself.
He saw more than he expected when he was able to see again. Yes, he saw plenty. Yeah. He had the eyes of spiritual sense.
He recognized the Christ, and that's what really threw the Pharisees off. They hated that.
They did.
Right.
And so Jesus needed to find the man and continue his teaching. And it's a beautiful, what does he say, Bruce? What's in the lesson? When Jesus finds the man.
Just I believe on the Son of God.
Yes? What does the man say?
Who is he?
Who is he?
That I might believe on him.
I believe on it.
And the Christ answer?
That he was talking to the Son of God.
That's right.
He's talking to you right now.
And then the man's answer?
I believe.
I believe.
That's beautiful.
Lord,
Yeah.
I believe.
That's a beautiful, beautiful one.
Yeah, the reference that Luann gave us from John 10:4-5, it talks about the sheep that know the true voice. They'll flee from the stranger. So that describes what this man did very clearly.
Thank you, yes. And it said that the man had an increasing awareness of Christ. He saw him as a prophet, a master. He knew he was from God. He knew he was the Son of God. He knew he could trust him, and then he was going to worship him. So he got it. Simple, blind beggar got it. And the Pharisees, they were the ones that were blind, truly blind, weren't they? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with a hard heart. So.
But that blind man had the humility necessary.
That's it. Tom from New York, did you want to say something?
Well, I just really like what Luann did for today's Bible study. I just want to say how much I appreciate that. The research she did and talking about, John A. and Matthew Henry. I think it's so important that we study the Bible. And so I think it's so great that we do that. And it makes us stand out in a very big way. All you have to do is look at some of the websites from some of the other branch churches of the Boston Org, and you will be hard-pressed to see anything about the Bible. Okay? It's really important what we do.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah.
And we are having more and more people. People have found the roundtable, but more and more people are finding the Bible study and appreciating it. I think last week, even though we only hear, so many voices, last week we had 74 people attending live. So that's why it's so important we keep a standard. And it is a Bible study, but it's the spiritual interpretation of it, and how it can apply to our own lives.
And one goes back.
Go ahead, Mike.
All of the Bible studies have been such an inspiration that it just pushes you to want to learn more. Search it till you get the full understanding of what's going on, to the best of your ability.
Thank you very much. So true.
What I was going to say was that the big difference too is when you go back and look at the journals from 1800s, they have great explanations of the Bible stories, etc. And when I got the bound volumes from our church when it disbanded, the ones from the 1990s into the 2000s, the boxes weighed a ton. And when you opened up the journal, it was all pictures with this fancy paper, but there was absolutely no spiritual substance in it. And that's exactly why these Bible studies are so important.
Thank you.
That's right. And that's why we were compelled to publish our own magazine many decades ago.
And we have another one coming out soon, March edition. So, well, anyone else who needs to add something?
I just wanted to say, for me, the Bible studies make the Bible come alive and has more meaning. Whereas before, when I was in a branch church and part of the mother church, it was just reading it. And it just didn't, even though I felt inspired, it's not the same as when you have a Bible study. And this one is done so well, and thank you, Luann. You did a beautiful job.
Thank you, Luann.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Luann.
Thank you, Luann.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you all
everyone
for joining
who
us.
participated.
Yes, thank you for joining us.